The Science of Mind by Ernest Holmes. Introduction. The Thing Itself. We all look forward to the day when science and religion shall walk hand in hand through the visible to the invisible. Science knows nothing of opinion, but recognizes a government of law whose principles are universal. Yet any scientist who refuses to accept intangible values has no adequate basis for the values which he has already discovered. Revelation must keep faith with reason, and religion with law, while intuition is ever spreading its wings for greater flights, and science must justify faith in the invisible. To suppose that the creative intelligence of the universe would create man in bondage and leave him bound would be to dishonor the creative power which we call God. To suppose that God could make man as an individual without leaving him to discover himself would be to suppose an impossibility. Individuality must be spontaneous. It can never be automatic. The seed of freedom must be planted in the innermost being of man. But, like the prodigal son, man must make the great discovery for himself. We see abundance in the universe. We cannot count the grains of sand on a single beach. The earth contains untold riches, and the very air is vibrant with power. Why then is man weak, poor, and afraid? The science of mind deals with these questions. The divine plan is one of freedom. Bondage is not God ordained. Freedom is the birthright of every living soul. All instinctively feel this. The truth points to freedom under law. Thus, the inherent nature of man is forever seeking to express itself in terms of freedom. We do well to listen to this inner voice, for it tells us of a life wonderful in its scope, of a love beyond our fondest dreams, of a freedom which the soul craves. But the great love of the universe must be one with the great law of its own being, and we approach love through the law. This, then, is the teaching, love and law. As the love of God is perfect, so the law of God is also perfect. We must understand both. Whatever the nature of any principle may be, insofar as it is understood by anyone, it may be understood by all who take the time to investigate. This does not require an unusual degree of intelligence, but rather a practical application of what we now know in order that we may increase our knowledge. The study of the science of mind is a study of first cause, spirit, mind, or that invisible essence, that ultimate stuff and intelligence from which everything comes, the power back of creation, the thing itself. We accept this thing and believe in it. What we desire is to know more about it and how to use it. From proof alone, we know we are dealing with a definite principle. If one, through the conscious use of his knowledge, can produce a certain result, he must know with what he is dealing. It may seem as though in dealing with metaphysics we are dealing with something that is too abstract. But what is tangible other than results? Principles are forever hidden from our eyes. We accept the deductions of science insofar as they are proved, and we recognize that they are built upon immutable but invisible principles. The universe never plays favorites. We are so used to the thought that if we mix certain colors we get certain other colors, that we do not realize we are dealing with a principle. We know that whoever blends those particular colors will get the same result, but we do not know why. The wisest man living does not know why. We do not have to stretch our credulity any more in metaphysics. We think of metaphysics perhaps as something that only the most profound thinkers have ever known about, but we should remember that we also are thinkers. The profound thought of all ages has stood in awe of life itself, realizing that here is a power and potentiality, the highest possibilities of which the human intellect cannot fathom. Universal principles are never respecters of persons. The universe has no favorites. Therefore it is written, "And let him that is athirst come, and whosoever will, let him take the water of life freely." Nothing supernatural about the study of life. Let us then approach the science of mind, the science of spiritual psychology, with awe, but not with fear, with truly a humble thought, but not with a sense that we are unworthy. Let us approach it normally, happily, willing to accept, glad to experiment, hoping and believing that as the result of our efforts we shall each derive a great good, a sound understanding of the natural laws of life, as they apply to the individual and his relationship to the whole universal scheme of things. This is the simple meaning of true metaphysical teaching, the study of life and the nature of the law, governed and directed by thought, always conscious that we live in a spiritual universe, that God is in, through, around, and for us. There is nothing supernatural about the study of life from the metaphysical viewpoint. That which today seems to us supernatural, after it is thoroughly understood, will be found spontaneously natural. We all know that many have been healed of physical disease through prayer. Let us analyze this. Why are some healed through prayer while others are not? Can we believe that there is a God who picks out some man and says, "I will honor your prayer, but I do not think so much of Mr. So-and-so"? It is superstitious to believe that God will answer the prayer of one above another. Jesus said that God maketh his sun to rise on the evil and on the good, and sendeth rain on the just and on the unjust. Since some people have been healed through prayer, while others have not, the answer is not that God has responded to some and not to others, but that some have responded to God more than others. Their prayer, their thought, has responded by corresponding. The answer to prayer is in the prayer. But what is a prayer? A prayer is a movement of thought within the mind of the one praying, along a definite line of meditation. That is, for a specific purpose. What is the mind? No man living knows. We know a great deal about the mind, but not what it is. By mind, we mean consciousness. We are now using it. We cannot locate mind in the body, for while the body is a necessary vehicle for consciousness while we are here, it is not consciousness. We cannot isolate mind. All we know about it is not what it is, but what it does. And the greatest philosopher who ever lived knows no more than this, except that he may tell us more of how it works. There are not two minds, only two names. Mind, the thing, spirit, causation, is beyond, and yet not beyond, our grasp. Beyond, in that it is so big. Within, in that wherever we grasp at it, we are it to the extent that we grasp it. But since it is infinite, we can never encompass it. We shall never encompass God, and yet we shall always be in God and of God. Mind comes under two classifications. There are not two minds, but rather two names employed in describing states of consciousness: the objective, or conscious, and the subjective, or unconscious. We think of the unconscious state as our conscious use of mind. The subconscious, or subjective state of mind, sometimes called the unconscious state, is the part of the mind which is set in motion as a creative thing by the conscious state. In the body of this textbook, under the heading of subjective mind, we say, in the subjective mind of man, we find a law obeying his word, the servant of his spirit. Suggestion has proved that the subconscious mind acts upon our thoughts. It is the mental law of our being, and the creative factor within us. It is unnecessary at this point to go into all the details of the subjective mind and its mode of action. It is enough to say that within us is a mental law, working out the will and purposes of our conscious thoughts. This can be no other than our individual use of that greater subjective mind, which is the seat of all mental law and action, and is the servant of the eternal Spirit throughout the ages. Limitless power at man's disposal. Marvelous as the concept may be, it is nonetheless true that man has at his disposal, in what he calls his subjective mind, a power that seems to be limitless. This is because he is one with the whole on the subjective side of life. Man's thought, falling into his subjective mind, merges with the universal subjective mind, and becomes the law of his life, through the one great law of all life. There are not two subjective minds, there is but one subjective mind, and what we call our subjective mind is really the use we are making of the one law. Each individual maintains his identity in law through his personal use of it, and each is drawing from life what he thinks into it. To learn how to think is to learn how to live, for our thoughts go into a medium that is infinite in its ability to do and to be. Man, by thinking, can bring into his experience whatsoever he desires, if he can think correctly, and becomes a living embodiment of his thoughts. This is not done by holding thoughts, but by knowing the truth. Within us, then, there is a creative field, which we call the subjective mind. Around us, there is a creative field, which we call subjective. One is universal, and the other is individual. But in reality, they are one. There is one mental law in the universe, and where we use it, it becomes our law, because we have individualized it. It is impossible to plumb the depths of the individual mind, because the individual mind is not individual, but is individualized. Behind the individual is the universal, which has no limits. In this concept alone lies the possibility of eternal and endless expansion. Everyone is universal on the subjective side of life, and individual only at the point of conscious perception. The riddle is solved, and we all use the creative power of the universal mind every time we use our own mind. All thought is creative. Since this is true, it follows that we cannot say that one thought is creative while another is not. We must say that all thought is creative, according to the nature, impulse, emotion, or conviction behind the thought. Thought creates a mold in the subjective, in which the idea is accepted and poured, and sets power in motion, in accordance with the thought. Ignorance of this excuses no one from its effects, for we are dealing with law and not with whimsical fancy. The conscious mind is superior to the subjective and may consciously use it. Great as the subconscious is, its tendency is set in motion by the conscious thought. And in this possibility lies the path to freedom. The karmic law is not kismet. It is not fate, but cause and effect. It is a taskmaster to the unwise, a servant to the wise. The road to freedom is not mysterious. Experience has taught us that the subjective tendency of this intelligent law of creative force may consciously be directed and definitely used. This is the greatest discovery of all time. There is no mystery here, but a profound fact and a demonstrable one. The road to freedom lies, not through mysteries or occult performances, but through the intelligent use of nature's forces and laws. The law of mind is a natural law in the spiritual world. But what do we mean by the spiritual world? We mean the world of conscious intelligence. The subjective is a world of law and of mechanical order in our lives. It is largely a reaction. an effect, a way. It is never a person, though it often appears to act as though it were one. Right here, many are completely misled, mistaking subjective impulses for actual personalities. This, however, is a field of investigation not to be fully considered here. The simplest way to state the proposition is to say that we have a conscious mind that operates within a subjective field, which is creative. The conscious mind is spirit. The subjective mind is law. One is a complement of the other, and no real individuality could be expressed without a combination of both. No man has ever plumbed the depths of either the conscious or the subconscious life. In both directions we reach out to infinity, and since we cannot encompass infinity, we shall always be expanding and always enlarging our capacity to know and to experience. We need not ask why these things are so. There can be no reason given as to why the truth is true. We do not create laws and principles, but discover and make use of them. Let us accept this position relative to the laws of mind and spirit, and see what we can do with them, rather than how we may contradict the inevitable. Our mind and spirit is our echo of the eternal thing itself, and the sooner we discover this fact, the sooner we shall be made free and happy. The universe is filled with spirit and filled with law. One reacts to the other. We are spirit and we are law. The law of our life reacts to our spiritual or material concepts, and builds and rebuilds according to our beliefs and faith. Learning to trust will make us happy. All men seek some relationship to the universal mind, the oversoul, or the eternal spirit, which we call God, and life reveals itself to whoever is receptive to it. That we are living in a spiritual universe, which includes the material or physical universe, has been a conclusion of the deepest thinkers of every age. That this spiritual universe must be one of pure intelligence and perfect life, dominated by love, by reason, and by the power to create, seems an inevitable conclusion. There is a power in the universe that honors our faith in it. There is a law in the universe which exacts the uttermost farthing. We all wish to feel that the power behind everything is good, as well as creative, an eternal and changeless intelligence, in which man lives and moves and has his being. Intuitively, we sense that every man in his native state is some part or manifestation of this eternal principle, and that the entire problem of limitation, evil, suffering, and uncertainty is not God ordained, but is the result of ignorance. It has been written that the truth shall make us free, provided we know the truth, and we note that the evolution of man's consciousness brings with it the acquisition of new powers and higher possibilities. We find ourselves torn by confusion, by conflict, by affirmation and denial, by emotion congested by fear, congealed by pride. We are afraid of the universe in which we live, suspicious of people around us, uncertain of the salvation of our own souls. All these things negatively react and cause physical disorders. Nature seems to await our comprehension of her, and since she is governed by immutable laws, the ignorance of which excuses no man from their effects, the bondage of humanity must be a result of our ignorance of the true nature of reality. The storehouse of nature may be filled with good, but this good is locked to the ignorant. The key to this door is held in the mind of intelligence, working in accordance with universal law. Through experience, man learns what is really good and satisfying, what is truly worthwhile. As his intelligence increases, and his capacity to understand the subtle laws of nature grows, he will gradually be set free. As he learns the truth will automatically free him. When we learn to trust the universe, we shall be happy, prosperous, and well. We must learn to come under that divine government, and accept the fact that nature's table is ever filled. Never was there a cosmic famine. The finite alone has wrought and suffered. The infinite lies stretched in smiling repose. God is always God, no matter what our emotional storm or what our objective situation may be. There is always a something hidden in the inner being that has never been violated. We may stumble, but always there is that eternal voice, forever whispering within our ear, that thing which causes the eternal quest, that thing which forever sings and sings. Divine nature is in every man. This is the thing itself. Briefly, let us recapitulate. There is that within every individual which partakes of the nature of the universal wholeness, and, insofar as it operates, is God. That is the meaning of the word Emmanuel, the meaning of the word Christ. There is that within us which partakes of the nature of the divine being, and since it partakes of the nature of the divine being, we are divine. It reacts to us according to our belief in it, and it is an immutable law, subject to the use of the least among us, no respecter of persons. It cannot be bound. Our soul will never change or violate its own nature. All the denying of it will never change it. All the affirming of it will never make it any more than it is. But since it is what it is, and works in the way that it works, it appears to each through his belief. It is done unto each one of us as we believe. We will say then that in spirit man is one with God. But what of the great law of the universe? If we are really one with the whole, we must be one with the law of the whole, as well as one with the spirit of the whole. If we try to find something difficult to grasp, then we shall never grasp it, because we shall always think of it as being incomprehensible. The mind which we discover within us is the mind that governs everything. This is the thing itself, and we should recognize its simplicity. End of part 1 of the introduction. And Ernest Holmes is, in a very orderly process, he is explaining to us what is God. So he calls it the thing itself, and he's explaining that God is mind, and God is intelligence, and that God is good. And he's also explaining that there's two parts to our mind, our conscious and our subconscious. And they both work together in harmony, and one is the correspondence to the other, like a yin and yang. So they're not, in a duality, they're in a unity, they're working together in perfect harmony. Just two different aspects. And our conscious mind is our thinking mind, the part of us that we're aware of and we're conscious of. Our subconscious mind is the part of us that's automatic. It's the receptacle of all our conscious thoughts. And it's the law that's creating constantly. And he also points out that we are one with the whole universe. Our subconscious is linked to everybody else's subconscious. It's like one giant mind, but we have our own individual place in that mind. But he's not going to get into that too much here. He's just laying the foundation of the thing itself, God.